The courtroom buzzed with tension as Judge Amy Coney Barrett presided over the heated proceedings. Karoline Leavitt, young but unshakable, stood at the defense table, papers neatly stacked before her. As a hearing turned into a moment, no one saw coming. Before we begin, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to uncover what they hid. No one anticipated this. Barrett's stern gaze locked onto Karoline, silently daring her to stumble. The stakes had never been higher. Karoline's opponents had long whispered that she was too young, too bold, too inexperienced to handle a case of this magnitude. Now, facing the highest court, Karoline knew she had to be flawless. Barrett tapped her gavel sharply, signaling the room to silence. "Ms. Leavitt, approach the bench," she commanded. Karoline moved gracefully, her confidence concealed behind a calm, respectful demeanor. She approached without hesitation, locking eyes with Barrett. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady and clear. Barrett's lips tightened. She wasn't here to indulge the young woman's poise. She intended to make an example of her. "Judge." Barrett had already drafted contempt papers, convinced Karoline would falter under pressure. It was a risky move, jailing a rising star, but Barrett believed that maintaining authority meant striking swiftly and decisively. "Ms. Leavitt," she intoned, "you are dangerously close to contempt." The audience, packed with media, attorneys, and curious onlookers, leaned forward. They expected Karoline to crack. They expected the flash of arrogance, the misstep, that would justify Barrett's harsh warning. Instead, Karoline blinked once, slowly, and smiled politely. "Respectfully, Your Honor, may I clarify?" Barrett raised an eyebrow. "Proceed carefully," she warned. Karoline nodded. She flipped open a legal binder, revealing meticulously organized tabs. She pointed to a specific precedent, one Barrett herself had cited years ago during a critical decision. "Your Honor's own ruling in Miller v. Hartman applies here." The room went deathly silent. Barrett frowned, leaning forward. "Explain yourself," she said coolly. Karoline didn't miss a beat. She outlined with precision how Barrett's earlier interpretation protected her current actions. Every word from Karoline was crisp, respectful, but devastatingly effective. Barrett's gavel twitched in her hand, but she didn't bring it down. She was forced to listen, and every moment made it harder for her to pursue the contempt charge. Karoline wasn't merely defending herself, she was teaching a masterclass in courtroom survival. Even seasoned lawyers in the gallery exchanged impressed glances. Karoline continued, citing 3 more relevant cases. Her knowledge was encyclopedic, but it wasn't just recitation. She wove the cases into a narrative so compelling that even the court reporter seemed to hang on every word. Barrett's jaw tightened. She realized jailing Karoline would now appear blatantly political. Determined to reassert control, Barrett interrupted. "Ms. Leavitt, are you accusing this court of bias?" The question was a trap. A single wrong word could end Karoline's career. But Karoline merely shook her head, smiling gently. "Of course not, Your Honor. I am merely upholding the integrity of your prior rulings." It was an answer so perfect that even Barrett had to respect it. Still, she wasn't ready to concede. "You walk a dangerous line, counsel," Barrett warned. Karoline bowed her head slightly. "I walk only where the law permits, Your Honor, nowhere else." The subtle defiance sent a ripple through the courtroom. The prosecution tried to intervene, sensing Barrett's grip slipping. "Your Honor, we move to strike counsel's remarks," they shouted. Barrett raised a hand sharply. "Overruled," she said through gritted teeth. She couldn't afford to look like she was ganging up on Karoline now. The optics were impossible. Karoline returned to her table, her face serene, but her heart pounding in her chest. She had survived the first. "You assault." Across the room, journalists scribbled frantically. Cameras outside were no doubt capturing every detail. The narrative was shifting fast, and Karoline was at the center of it. Barrett called a brief recess. Behind closed doors, her clerks urged caution. "She's airtight, Judge. Any move against her could backfire." Barrett nodded grimly. She hadn't underestimated Karoline's intelligence. She had underestimated her tactical genius. This wasn't some naive upstart. This was a prodigy. When court resumed, the atmosphere had changed. Barrett's tone was cooler, more formal. "Ms. Leavitt, proceed with your argument." Karoline rose, adjusting her blazer. She moved with the calm assurance of someone who knew the law better than those who sought to silence her. The audience watched, spellbound. Karoline laid out her case with surgical precision, dismantling the prosecution's arguments one by one. She anticipated every objection, preempted every challenge. It was like watching a chess grandmaster trap an opponent with a dozen moves still hidden. Even the prosecution's lead attorney looked rattled. At one point, Barrett leaned back, steepling, her fingers. She studied Karoline not as a threat anymore, but as a phenomenon. Who had trained her? Where had she learned this composure, this depth of knowledge? Karoline, for her part, kept her focus laser-sharp, never once looking smug or overconfident. When Karoline reached her closing, the courtroom hung on her every word. "This court stands as a pillar of justice," she said, voice resonant. "Justice demands consistency, fairness, and fidelity to precedent. I trust that your honor embodies these ideals as much today as ever." It was a masterstroke. Barrett tapped her pen thoughtfully. In another era, she might have punished such audacity. But today, with every eye watching, she had no choice but to acknowledge what was before her. A legal mind so brilliant it demanded respect, even from a sitting Supreme Court justice. The jury, though not yet deliberating, already looked convinced. They nodded subtly among themselves. Karoline had not only saved her client but had elevated herself in the public imagination. She wasn't just a lawyer, she was a phenomenon, a rising force in American law. Barrett adjourned for the day, but not before addressing Karoline directly. "Counsel, I commend you on your preparation and advocacy," she said, her tone neutral but heavy with meaning. Karoline bowed her head respectfully, hiding the fierce triumph that roared inside her. As the court emptied, journalists swarmed. Questions flew. "Karoline, how did you pull that off? Were you afraid?" Karoline smiled warmly but offered no grand statements. "The law protects all of us when we protect the law," she said simply. It was another quote destined for headlines. Inside her chambers, Barrett sat alone, mulling over the day's events. She thought back to her own youth, her own battles against skeptics. Maybe that's why Karoline's defiance stung so sharply. It was a mirror of herself, decades earlier. A humbling realization, but an undeniable one. Karoline, meanwhile, returned to her modest office, exhausted but exhilarated. She knew the fight wasn't over. Powerful forces would resent her newfound fame, but she also knew she had earned something invaluable today: credibility. And that could not be taken away easily. Within hours, news networks blared headlines. Leavitt School's Supreme Court Justice. Rookie lawyer humiliates prosecutors. The public devoured the story hungrily. In an age cynical about institutions, Karoline's triumph felt like a rare, honest victory. Barrett's reputation wouldn't suffer. She had pivoted just in time. But behind the scenes, whispers began among the judiciary. Who was this Karoline Leavitt? Was she destined for the bench herself one day? The thought was thrilling and terrifying for those invested in the old ways. The next morning, Karoline found flowers on her desk from an anonymous admirer. The note read simply, "To the future of American law." She smiled, pocketing the note. She didn't have time for flattery. There were more battles ahead, more walls to tear down. Emails flooded in, job offers, speaking invitations, book deals. Karoline accepted none. She wasn't ready to sell her soul for fame. She wanted to build something real, something that couldn't be bought or faked. She wanted to change the system from the inside out. Judge Barrett, watching from afar, allowed herself a rare smile. Whatever their clash had been, she respected Karoline now. In a world drowning in mediocrity, the fire of a true legal mind was a treasure, even if it burned the old guard along the way. As Karoline prepared for her next case, she reread her notes carefully. Victory was sweet, but arrogance was fatal. She had seen too many bright stars fall to hubris. Her secret weapon wasn't just brilliance, it was humility paired with relentless discipline. The world would hear much more from Karoline Leavitt. Of that there was no doubt. And deep down, even Judge Barrett knew. She hadn't tried to jail a reckless upstart. She had tried, and failed, to cage a legal genius who was just getting started.